Making this fabric mask. It's 2 layers of cotton or polycotton with a wire piece in the top so that you can bend it to shape it to your face. Fabric ties for adjustability. It also has this pocket on the back so that you can slide in an additional filter if you wish. It's also a great shape for wearing over the top of an N95 mask if you have one, to keep it clean to last a little bit longer, or you can wear it on its own. So let's get started. The first thing you need to do is cut out all of your pieces so you're ready to go. You're going to cut 2 pieces of your outside fabric, and when you cut these, you want to go ahead and fold the 2 layers of the fabric together with the pretty sides facing one another, and then you can cut them out together just like if they were one piece, and keep them that way so they're ready to go into the machine. Cut out your 2 layers of the 2 pieces for the lining, and you're going to cut out 2 pieces of fabric to make your ties. They're going to be an 1.5" by 36" wide piece of fabric to start with, and then you iron them to fold it in like so, and then iron them again until they make this nice strong tie. So the first thing I like to do is get my ties finished so that when I get to the end of the mask, I am ready to add them. So you line up your tie with the open edge headed towards the right, and you line that right up onto this part of your presser foot. You're going to do a straight stitch, which means your stitch width is 0 and your stitch length is about 3.5. Put your presser foot down and go ahead and just sew a nice straight stitch. You can lock it at the top and just run it all the way along the entire length of both of the ties. I already got these started, so that we'll be ready to put them on in just a moment, but you'll just continue that for all of your ties. Now that we have those finished, we're going to get to work on our mask. So take your outside pieces that are sandwiched together, and you're going to continue with that straight stitch again. Line these up so you have about 1/4 inch salvage from the edge of your needle over, and you're just going to sew a straight stitch along this front curved edge of the mask, like going from the top of your nose to the chin. If you are sewing, as you sew these 2 pieces, or if you're sewing multiple masks, I like to just kind of keep going, and I slide the next one in and keep going, so that I don't have to worry about wasting a lot of thread, pulling it out and cutting each time. And then if I end up with a long chain, because I'm generally making about 10 masks at a time, I'll end up with this long chain, and I get one of my precious children to come along and do all the cutting for me. All right, so now that you have these 2 pieces, you're going to open both of them up and do a top stitch. I skipped this part on the first about 50 masks that I made because I didn't think it was entirely necessary, and it's not, but it does make for a nicer finish. And you can see here when you pull this smooth, it's still a little bit bubbly through here. If you go ahead and take the effort to do this top stitch, it just gives you it pulls tighter and smoother when you're wearing it, so it doesn't come in towards your nose and mouth quite as much. So I think it is worth the extra time to do it. So you are now on the pretty side of your fabric, and you're going to line up this seam, the open part of the seam you just made, along this outside part of the foot there. And you're just going to sew a straight stitch all the way down. And while you go, you're going to push the salvage underneath over to the right with your thumbs, so that you want all of the cut edges of your fabric headed the same direction. And you're just going to do this top stitch to then catch those, reinforcing this seam and making it lay very nicely as you're wearing your mask. Usually you would match your thread color to your fabric. I'm using black so that you guys can see it a little better. So you will do this to your lining piece and your outside piece. So when you're finished, it looks more like this. So now we're going to take those two pieces that have been nicely top stitched and put the pretty top stitched sides together with the two chins together and the two nose points together. And we're going to put a pin to line up right where the seams meet, both at the nose and at the chin. All right, so your pieces are all together. Now you're going to take your piece, and I already did this one, but I'll do it again so you can see what I'm talking about. These four ends that go over by your ears, I've already sewn these today, but for you, they'd still be rough edges. So you're going to put it in your machine. You're going to line up your cut edge right at this edge of your presser foot. You're going to put your stitch width over to a 4 to have a zigzag stitch. And you're going to put your stitch length down at a 1.5, so it's a nice small stitch. So you're essentially making like a rolled hem edge, and your needle is actually going to go back and forth over the top of grabbing the edge of your fabric. This is just to finish it off so that you don't have any fraying or raveling, because hopefully you guys are going to wash these a whole lot of times. So that's what your finished edge is going to look like. You can do an even smaller stitch if you wish to make it even tighter, but I think that's all that's necessary. So once you have those done, now we're going to sew your top and bottom edges along your nose line and your chin line. So pull them so they're nice and tight and lined up perfectly with one another. You're going to switch your stitch width back to 0 and your stitch length back to 3.5. You're going to line up so that you get about 1/4 inch selvage edge and sew it. As you come to where the lining meets the outside, you might have to pick up your presser foot to get it to lay smoothly so it doesn't wrinkle up underneath. And then you just stitch all the way along the top line. And then all the way along the bottom line, again pulling it to make sure that everything is nice and smooth. 1/4 inch selvage, sew your straight stitch. All right, now we're going to trim our strings. Now your mask is pretty well all put together. Trim your strings, take out your pins. And now we're going to add that magical wire, which is really what gives this mask its nice shape. So you can use pretty much anything. This is a 20 gauge jewelry wire. And what I like to do is put a little bit of a bend at the end so that it's not sticking out with that sharp edge. So just with my fingers, or you can use needle nose pliers, I just give it a little bit of a loop to make it a smooth edge. This is 20 gauge jewelry wire. You could also use florist wire, a pipe cleaner, a twist tie, anything you can find laying around the house. Electrical wire with the coating on it is nice because it doesn't wiggle around as you're sewing as much as with the pipe cleaners. But this 20 gauge jewelry wire I'm using is definitely my favorite of the things that I've tried. So give it a little bend so you find the center to line up with the peak of your nose. And then you're going to line the wire up in near the stitched line that you just did, but just up into this selvage part. You're going to do a zigzag, so we're going to go back to a 4 on the stitch width, and let's do about a 2.5 on our stitch length. So very carefully and slowly, you might want to start this by hand, cranking your wheel towards you to see what you're doing as you're going over this wire. And then I go back and forth a few times, a few stitches forward, a few stitches backwards to hold that end of my wire. And then I'm very carefully going back and forth over the top of the wire for the entire 7-inch length of the wire. And a couple times you might miss it and not go over it, and that's okay as long as you get it most of the time. It's then going to get captured in the next step that we do. So if you miss it in a few places, it's not a big deal. Just do the best you can. Go slow. You don't want to go along fast and then get your needle hitting the wire and breaking your needle like I almost just did right there, which is going to happen. Just be careful and don't go too fast. So what just happened for me is that I actually caught right through the middle of where I made the bend on my wire, and that's great because that's really holding it in place nicely. If you can see what I'm talking about here, it's going right, the stitches went right in the middle of my little bend there. So that's holding it extra securely and is kind of your ideal. Most of my masks I'm using my serger, and I really like doing this top and bottom edge on the serger for a slightly stronger, more reinforced seam if that's an option for you. But with the straight stitch, it works just fine as well. So now you are going to stick your fingers in your hole here and turn it right side out. To get it started, I kind of stick my fingers on top of this wire and kind of bend it to start it rolling through. And once you get it started, it comes on through. Again, if you have some house elves that are not currently busy going to school, they are incredibly helpful at doing this particular job. I'm very grateful for my little house elves that cut things for me and turn things right side out. All right, so now you are going to smooth out your mask, and this is what it looks like. You want to get these lines out smooth and lined up as best you can. Takes a little bit of pulling and yanking, but I do it all by hand. I don't use the iron except for making my ties. I'm just not willing to spend the time of ironing. So you're pretty much done putting it together. Now we're going to add our ties. So what I do with my ties is I line them up so that all of my cut ends line up at the bottom. Now I know where the center of my two ties is. I put a pin to mark the center just to keep track of it. I just stick it through, super loose, no big deal. It's just telling me where that is. So this is 36 inches long, so each end is 18. When you're going around the top of your head, you need more length than when you're going around your neck. So I put that 18-inch point on this top edge along the nose line, and that helps take care of having the top tie about 2 to 3 inches longer than the bottom tie, which works out nicely. So as you pin this in place, you can just tuck under your outside fabric a little bit to give it a nice finished edge here, which you're about to stitch down. Put your second pin in. So you're like this, and then go ahead and pin your ties on the other side as well. Just like so. If you don't if this is for the medical professionals, it sounds like they really prefer the fabric ties for adjustability. But if you're making this for yourself, you could also use elastic to go around the top, around the back of your head. And if you're doing that, I would do 12 inches for the top elastic and 10 inches for the bottom. Or you could do a piece of 7-inch elastic to make an ear loop. It's just personal preference. In that case, I would just flip under the top edge of my outside fabric to give it a nice finished edge. Just make it work for you. We're going back to straight stitch, so we're going to go to a 0 stitch width and a 3.5 stitch length, and then we are going to sew the entire perimeter of the mask. And while we do so, it will take care of adding our ties as well. So we are just going to sew down along this edge. When I get to the top and bottom edge of the tie where it's going to have some pressure, I use this button to reverse my stitch a little bit. With my needle down, I'm going to lift my presser foot and turn 90 degrees so that I can go around this turn. Put your presser foot back down and use your fingers to kind of finger iron to make the lining and the outside fabric seam line up nicely, and then you're just going to stitch that down all the way around. And you may have to stop and keep you just kind of, if you roll it, use your fingers like this to rub it back and forth, you can get it to go where you want it to go. And just keep pulling it tight, pulling it smooth. And this is what's going to give it that nice finished edge. Go over the edge of your tie, reverse your stitch, leave your needle down, pick up your presser foot, turn 90 degrees, take out your pin, and continue on your way. Back stitch, leave your needle down, pick up your presser foot, turn, and now you're coming up along your last edge. So as you approach the wire, you can feel with your fingernail here that you're coming up to your wire. So I have to come this way just a little bit to get around that curved part of the wire. But as I go, I keep checking that my lining and my outside fabric are nicely lined up, and I get as close up to that wire as I can. But you definitely want the wire on the right hand side of your needle. So this stitch is pushing it up into that channel where you want it to be. So it stays nice and safe, doesn't come out when you wash it. And I think also having the 7-inch length of wire, I know a lot of people are recommending even as little as a 2-inch wire. I feel like the 7-inch wire really gives you a much tighter fit across the top of your face. I feel like it also spreads the load a little bit, so there's not so much pressure just on the top of the nose. It helps spread it out across the whole top line here. So then when you put your beautiful finished mask on, you put it up on your nose and you just have to mash it down a little bit to get it to perfectly fit your contours. A good test at that point is if you have a pair of glasses you can put on. If they don't steam up, you have a pretty good fit. If they steam up, keep mashing that wire until it really fits snugly to your contours of your face. At this point, you can be finished, or if you would like to make a filter as well, let's move on to that step. So for our filter, what we're going to do is we are going to cut 2 of these lining pieces, filter pieces at the same time. We are using a blue shop towel. It is just like a paper towel, but it's a little sturdier and thicker and has a little bit of a water repellent type finish to it. So you are going to take that towel and fold it in half, and then fold it in half again, lining up all your edges nicely and smoothly. Now on your folded edge, you're going to take your pattern piece and line it up so that where it says on fold, it's on your fold from here to here. Then just, if you want to pin this into place, you can. I'm just going to hold it because it doesn't have to be super exact. And then you're just going to cut out your piece. So I am cutting through 4 layers of the shop towel all at the same time, which will give me 2 filters out of this one shop towel. And then my thinking is that you can wash the filter with your mask a few times, and then after you've done that a couple times, go ahead and just switch out the filter for a new one. So now you have your 2 beautifully cut filters. You only need 1. I mean, you could leave them doubled up, but for breathability, I really feel like just 1 is the better choice. Now, because this is just a filter and it's something I'm going to throw away, I'm just going to use tape. And I am going to overlap this cut piece just about 1/4 of an inch. If you go more than that, then your curve will actually be too severe to fit nicely in your mask. And I'm just going to put a little piece of Scotch tape there to hold. There's lots of other, any kind of tape would be fine. You could actually staple this, or if you prefer, you can just go ahead and stitch, which would work great. I'm doing the tape thinking that maybe you give a few shop towels and the pattern piece when you deliver these masks to friends so that you don't have to cut all of the filters yourself. So to get the filter, which is now finished, into your mask, Flip the mask over so that you can see where your opening is. Match this so your curves match. I kind of roll in the top and the bottom to make it a long, narrower piece, and then feed it in. I'll let you guess at this point who I make do this step. Those sweet little house elves. So you can slide it. No, this part is not particularly easy or fun, but it's not too bad. And there is a nose end and a chin end on this filter, so pay some attention as you're cutting it out and keep it that way, and it will fit better into your mask, of course. And pull and smooth and smush until you've got it lined up properly. The more time you spend making that perfect, the more comfortable and safe it will be as you wear it. But there you go. A filtered cotton face mask with a wire edge, rounded chin. Stay safe out there.